Hello, hello. How are you, everyone? Oh, I'm so excited for our conversation today. So, before we get started, I'm going to do a brief introduction. Welcome to Mastering Compensation in a New Market with our very own Kendall Bonner. We're so excited to be able to. Okay, I hear it. I don't hear anything. Or I see it. I don't hear anything. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if y'all can hear us in the chat. All right. Well, while we wait for that to come through, that confirmation to come through. Okay. All right. Good. We got at least one. So welcome again. This is Mastering Compensation in a New Market with our very own Kendall Bonner. My name is Rachel Allen with Black EXP Network, and we are excited to have you here today. There's a lot of changes coming up, and we want to make sure that we are as prepared as we can possibly be before these changes occur. And we also understand it's going to take some time for us to really get this going. But you'll get some really valuable information today. So quickly, Black EXP Network, we're one of the One EXP affinity groups here, and we have a membership. So if you're not a member, we encourage you to go on Workplace and click on that join for our group. We are always having valuable trainings, sharing information, passing back and forth referrals. So it's definitely a group you want to be a part of. Outside of that, we are able to do these things like have these trainings and webinars so we can discuss what's going on in our industry today. So let me introduce you to our speaker today. Our very own Kendall Bonner, recently named one of Housing Wire's 2024 Women of Influence, is a seasoned real estate leader in Florida and Florida licensed attorney. With over 13 years in the industry, she began as a realtor in 2011, founded her brokerage in 2014. That's 10 years ago. And now co-leads the Kendall Bonner team at eXp Realty, known for delivering a top-tier real estate experience in Tampa Bay. As VP of Industry Relations at eXp Realty, Kendall plays a key role in strengthening the company's strategic partnerships and guiding agents through significant industry changes like this one. A recognized authority on real estate marketing and technology, she regularly speaks at major industry events and contributes to various media outlets. Outside of work, Kendall is passionate about reading, exploring new tech, and enjoying time with her family, including her rescue pup, Buddy. So let's give her applause and a warm welcome. And without further ado, Kendall Bonner.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here today. So excited to talk to you guys about all of the things, all the changes with the NAR settlement. And thank you, Black EXP Network, for inviting me today. I appreciate you all. You guys are fantastic. I love what our organization is doing, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. I think I'm going to do a screen share. And there we go. All right. Can we? Yes, perfect. Perfect. All right. So like she said, I am, former broker owner. I'm also a real estate professional like all of you. And I'm a co-founder of my team, the Kendall Bonner team, with my husband and, VP of Industry Relations. And so with that, because of that knowledge and experience, it's allowed me to be in a very unique position that I can help other agents understand what's happening and be able to, best assist agents as they go through this transition. Now, as I'm going through these slides, please feel free to take screenshots of the slides. I don't provide the slides just because a couple of different reasons, but part of that has to do with, and please forgive my dog if you can hear him, if just for a couple of different reasons, because text without context is pretext, and it's not really about what the information is on the slide so much as what I'm saying. So please take notes. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I'll do my best to address them as we have time at the end. And I do want you to know I will speak very fast, and forgive me for that. It's just because there's a lot of information to go through. And please know, because it's being recorded, you can always watch it again, right, to get the information that you need. So, the first thing I'd like to remind everyone is, Even though I know that there has been some confusion because there's a small handful of brokerages that have not yet settled, but I want you to know as the NAR dues paying member, you are protected by the settlement. So I just want to encourage you not to be concerned or stressed or worried about that. You are protected and you are expected to participate and follow the expectations and changes as a result of this NAR settlement. Another thing I want to point out before I really get into the rule changes is, understanding the language. I've heard a lot of agents refer to this as there's new laws. Well, technically, these are not new laws, at least not yet, as they exist at this time. These are policy changes. These are new rules that we are required to follow as a part of our membership in this trade organization who now has these rules, right? We're also participants in our MLSs who now are enforcing these rules. So think of them more as rules and policy changes, and at this point not refer to them as laws because that would actually be inaccurate. Okay. So right now, let's talk about the two main practical changes as a result of the settlement. The first is the removal of the commissions off of the MLS. Now, as you might recall, up until about a year ago, we had this requirement, and we refer to it now as a unilateral offer of compensation. But it was a requirement that basically said if a seller is putting their listing or their home as a listing in the MLS, they were required to pay a certain amount to offer some sort of compensation to the buyer's agent. That was a requirement. Now, up until a year ago, that requirement went down to zero, right? Meaning it was no longer a requirement. But up until a year ago, in most parts of the country, we'll say minus, like, for example, Northwest MLS, for example, and a few others, a small handful of others, this was generally a requirement across the nation. And so with the settlement, though, not only did it undo that requirement, so you no longer had the requirement to offer compensation, this new settlement, now the new rule is you cannot talk about compensation anywhere in the MLS. So the field that used to hold our compensation is now gone away in most parts of the country already because some MLSs have already started making the transition. And the second thing, a part of that is you cannot mention or refer to buyer agent commission anywhere in the MLS. So you can't put it in the public remarks. You cannot mention it in the private remarks. You cannot bury it in a slideshow in the photo gallery, right? So you cannot talk about buyer agent commissions anywhere on the MLS. So that's one major change. So what are the consequences of that change? Well, number one, listing agents, you no longer are required or responsible for collecting both sides of commission at the listing table, right? So you're just going to focus as a listing broker on your commission, your value proposition, and what you will be doing for the seller in that capacity as their listing agent. Now, this doesn't mean you won't talk about buyer agent commission going forward, because you absolutely will, but we'll talk about that on a later slide, what you talk about and how you talk to sellers about buyer agent comp. The second big change part of or consequence of the removal of commissions off the MLS and as a part of this NAR settlement is there was a carve out for concessions. So now you'll see some MLSs across the nation opting to add a field for concessions. Now, concessions are going to be for sellers can pay a concession to a buyer or credit to a buyer for repairs, closing cost credits, buying down rates, also the ability to pay compensation towards the buyer's agent's commissions. But the most important thing I want you to understand is do not think or do not trade concession for commission, right? Or vice versa. So concessions are more than buyer agent compensation. They're really about giving credits from the seller to the buyer for the buyer to use as they see fit on their closing costs. And we'll talk a little bit more about concessions in a little bit on another slide. The other major change as a result of the NAR settlement is the fact that buyers are now going to be asked to sign an agreement to hire their agent before working with them. And this is different than what some people are already using, which might be agency disclosures, which result or talk about your fiduciary duties. So your fiduciaries are, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting of all funds, reasonable skill, care, and due diligence. That's separate from being actually hired by the buyer to work with them through their transaction. And not only that, this agreement is required to be executed before you start showing them property. So this is a massive change for pretty much the entire country, even in the states or MLSs where hiring agreements or buyer agreements were already being utilized. There typically wasn't a required timeline associated with them, but now there is. So what does this mean for agents going forward? Well, one of the pieces is you're going to have to update your process. If you were an agent before who would take a phone call from a buyer and then just transition them into your car for showings, you're not really going to be able to do that anymore, because you're going to be asking a buyer to commit to paying you a significant amount of money. And so you'll want to have some sort of consultation or some sort of meeting with them prior to getting in the car and or meeting at showings, so that you can, one, have a conversation about your value proposition, two, have a conversation about what your fees are and what working with you is going to look like, right? So you will want to update your process. It's also important to note that these agreements are negotiable, unless your state has some other requirements, because I've heard like California, for example, I think they have a 3-month maximum time limit. But for most of the other people in the country, your agreements can be 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 1 year. They can also be for one property, multiple properties, a city, a community, multiple zip codes. If you're in a border town and you're licensed in 2 states, you might cover both territories as well. I don't recommend doing an agreement for an entire state if you don't actually work the entire state, for example. I would not lock your customer into an agreement like that. If I were you, I think that's just the best practice. But you can have varying negotiable terms on time limit and location, depending on your service area and what you and the buyer agree on. The other thing that you can negotiate with your buyers, whether your agreement is exclusive or non-exclusive. To give you an example of what that looks like today in real time, if as a listing agent, we typically take exclusive listing agreements where we are the only listing agent the seller hires. And no matter who buys the house, if they buy within the terms of our agreement, that listing agent will get paid from that transaction. Versus a scenario where you have a for sale by owner who hires multiple agents, non-exclusive, that they only get paid if they bring the buyer, right? And also that means that if the for sale by owner finds their own buyer, they're not paying any agent for services, right? So the same could be done with a buyer. You can now do an exclusive or a non-exclusive relationship with that buyer. Exclusive means that they really should only be signing one agreement and working with you exclusively and no one else. And no matter what home they buy within the terms of that agreement, you will be paid as their agent. Versus a non-exclusive agreement would say to a buyer, as long as I help you find your next home, you would only owe me a commission in that case where I find and help you actually purchase your next home. And in that scenario, a buyer might sign multiple non-exclusive agreements. That is possible. So why does this matter? Well, this is a big deal and a big change because we have a code of ethics that says that we will not impede on an exclusive relationship between another realtor and their customer. So in the past, what this looked like, you would ask a buyer, have you been working with any other agent? They would say yes or no. If they said yes, some agents stop there and refer them back to their other agent. Other agents would ask a second question. Oh, you've been working with another agent. Have you signed anything? Have you entered into an exclusive relationship in writing with that agent? Some customers would say yes or no. And if a customer said yes, you absolutely would be required to refer them back to their realtor that they had been working with. But now going forward, you won't be able to even stop there. You'll have to dig deeper to find out, are they an exclusive or a non-exclusive relationship? This is where the terms like buyer registries come out, where people might think like, hey, we might need a buyer registry going forward. But much like we have a listing registry, it's called the MLS, right? I'm not sure if that's going to happen. We don't have an official buyer registry at this time. But based on these new changes, I could see a world where that one might become something of interest to us as a community. So, but you will need to educate not only yourself, but you'll need to educate your buyers to make sure they understand what type of agreement they've negotiated with you and what they are signing. So whether it's an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement. The next thing to focus on here is what that agreement must say. So a settlement agreement requires realtors to enter into a written agreement before touring homes with the following details. Number one, it must describe and dictate or determine your rate of compensation and how that's determined. So is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage of the purchase price? Like, what is your fee and how is it determined? And it must be definitive, meaning it must be objectively ascertainable and it cannot be open-ended. So some examples of this are, meaning it can't be open-ended, so it cannot be a range. You cannot put whatever the buyer or whatever the seller is willing to pay. This is one of those moments where I tell agents, when we were children, how we used to be told, use your words. Well, I'm going to say now, you don't want to use your words, you want to use your numbers, right? So it's important that you actually put an amount. And then you don't need to put up to, because their compensation is already capped at the amount in the agreement. You can accept less and you cannot accept more, right? So a couple of things here too is because of 1, 2, and 3, if it's allowed in your state, which you would want to talk to your state broker to confirm, because some states do not allow a menu of services. You also have the ability to do a menu of services where you say, I charge X for A, B, and C. I charge Y for D, E, and F. Another more, a better example of that could be, I charge X if I show you 10 homes or less. I charge Y if I show you 11 homes or more. For example, a buyer can say, oh, I only looked at 7 homes, so I know my fee is X, versus I looked at 13 homes, so I know my fee is Y, right? So it must be objectively ascertainable. Now, because your fee is capped at the amount you put into your agreement, a lot of agents will ask about bonuses. What do I do if a seller or a builder is offering a bonus? So, and a lot of agents will then say, can I change my agreement? And so with the customer, and I will say to you, it depends. And let me give you some criteria. So you should write this down. If you're looking to amend your agreement, a couple of things you should consider. Number one, if you're going to attempt to amend your agreement, you should do it before showing the property. It is a best practice. If you're trying to amend your agreement after showing the property, I feel like you run some risk of that not being accepted or acceptable by your MLS or whoever whoever's enforcing the rule. Maybe it's title or your broker. And the reason why I say that is because we want to avoid the whole bait and switch concept, right? So for example, the whole point of this is disclosure and transparency and negotiation power with the buyer and their agent. As you may recall, in most MLSs, the buyer agent commission field was private, meaning it wasn't for public information, and most buyers did not know what their agent was going to be paid until 2 or 3 days before the closing and on their settlement statement, right? So this is supposed to eliminate that and allow buyers to be more participatory in the rates that they're paying and what their agents are getting paid, and be able to have what I like to refer to as a voice and a choice, right? In what they're paying. So when you are trying to amend your agreements, I highly recommend that you do that before you show the property. Now, you might be saying to me, Kendall, but how will I know a bonus is being offered? I never know until I show up. I believe that practice, all of that's going to change with the new push for marketing by listing agents going forward, that if a higher compensation is being offered or some sort of incentive is being offered, I'm pretty sure you will hear about it from those sellers and builders, right? So, so you would want to do that before you do the showing. Now, the other thing when you're thinking about amending is a couple of other thoughts I want you to consider. Number one, we amend purchase and sale agreements every single day. We amend purchase price, deadlines, contingencies, repairs, all of that. We amend that every single day as a part of our job. But how often are you amending your listing agreement? Probably almost very rarely, if ever. And why is that? It's because we've gotten better at writing listing agreements. And so I suspect the same will become true for buyer agreements as well. you're going to write buyer better agreements. And so you'll probably be looking to amend them less often. The other reason why this is important and why I say it depends is because the buyer has to agree. On occasion, you might have some buyers who will say to you, Kendall, I love you. You're amazing. I want you to make as much money as possible on this transaction. I have no problem with that. And then on the other hand, you're going to have some buyers that say, Kendall, I love you. I thought you were great. But if the seller has a penny more to give on this transaction, it should go to me. And my closing costs are reducing my cost of the transaction or my purchase price, right? So the buyer has to agree to these changes before you can even make them. So what's an alternative suggestion to you? Well, at EXP, we have come up with 3 strategies that you can use to write better agreements so that you're doing less amending, right? Because I think it's really important for you to understand what these strategies are so that you can implement them as you see fit and or as you negotiate with your customer. So the first strategy is just write the highest amount of compensation you think you can receive in your agreement. If you can get that buyer to agree to it, more power to you. And so, because remember, you can always accept less, you just cannot accept more than that number. So that's one strategy, is you just write the initial agreement at the highest amount you think you'll ever need to receive or accept as a buyer's agent. Number 2, you can write it out as a menu of services where it's allowed in your state. So you can write your traditional agreement. You're using your EXP BBA. You can write your traditional fee and the fee column, and then in the additional terms, you can write, for example, for any home purchase for DR Horton communities, my fee is Y, and so maybe your fee is X over here and Y in the additional terms for those specific communities, because you know that you've already sold 3 DR Horton homes and your 4th one, you're going to get a bonus, right? And you know what that bonus is. So that's something else that you can do. So you can write it like a menu. And number 3, you can leverage our single property buyer agreement. So basically you would write a traditional BBA and you would have that as your brokerage agreement with your customer. And then before showing, if you know that at 123 Main Street, there's an incentive or some sort of bonus, you can write an agreement for that specific property with your customer that outlines your commission for that one specific house, right? So that is your third strategy that you can leverage as well. Now, number 4, you cannot state your services are free unless, in fact, you will not be collecting compensation from any source. So what does that mean for you? For example, we had an agent ask us in the FAQ, what if I have a builder that I primarily work with? They've agreed to pay me X for any buyers I bring to this community that purchase. Can I put my agreement with my buyers? My compensation is 0 since I know the seller is going to pay me. The answer to that is please don't do that. If you put 0 in your agreement with your buyer, the seller is limited or capped at paying you 0. So please update, or please just try to match your buyer agreement with the fee that the seller is willing to pay you, and hopefully, and you will also be expected to get that in writing from the seller as well. The other point here on brokerage services is to understand virtual tours. If you are doing virtual tours on behalf of a buyer in your communities that you serve, you want to get into a buyer agreement with that buyer before doing those virtual tours. That does count as a broker service. However, if you are doing videos for the sake of Instagram, YouTube, or just to market and email to your database, you don't need a buyer agreement there. And what's the difference? One, you're working with a specific customer, or one, you are doing marketing services on behalf of yourself or a listing. And so you would not be required to get an agreement in that case. So just here's another example there. So what's the newest news? We have our deadline is this Saturday, August 17th. And yes, I said that right. So Saturday, so we're 5 business days away from the settlement deadline. And so, the reason why we have this deadline, because some people have questioned the deadline and why we have it, why it changed, and, will it change again? And I want to just explain this to you briefly. The reason we have this deadline set, or this date that we have today, it's because the judge on this case preliminarily approved the settlement in April. He has not admitted or submitted the final approval. That hearing is not until the end of November. That's the current date for that. But because of this preliminary approval, it triggered certain deadlines to be set and certain notices to go out. So deadlines included the deadline for MLSs and brokerages and agents to opt in or opt out of the settlement, as you may have it. And then as well, it set a class action notice date. And our settlement agreement with the plaintiffs was triggered by, and our deadlines were going to be set by the class action notice date. So once that date was set, we were able to set an actual deadline for us to all transition with these new rule changes, right? So now you have an opportunity where you need to update your documents. At this point, any buyers or sellers that you are working with today, if you're not talking to them about these changes, you are making a mistake because they are very likely to be impacted. And so if you have an active listing that you're working with right now, you need to update your listing this week, if not already, based on your MLS, to remove any language in the MLS or in your listing agreement that references commissions on the MLS. And why is that? Because that term, the MLS field for commissions has gone away, so you no longer can comply with that term. That's the main reason why you have to make that amendment or that modification to your existing active listing agreements, okay? Because that commission field will be coming out of the MLS if it hasn't already. So that's one. The second thing that you need to be thinking about is if you're pending buyers and or listings, you want to make sure if you haven't already gotten a printout, you need that synopsis or that market sheet from printout from your MLS on the day you went pending, what MLS or what the listing broker was offering you. And you want to make sure that's in SkySlope if you haven't done that already. So you want to get that printout so that whether you're paying as a EXP listing agent or if you're receiving as an EXP buyer broker agent, right? You want to make sure you have a printout of that. And so, and put that in our SkySlope file. If you have any, of course, any active buyers, you want to actually, if you haven't already, you want to get them under an EXP buyer brokerage agreement at this point, or state form if you have one that your clients prefer to use. But I suspect if you're using the EXP form, that will definitely suffice. And we encourage you to use the EXP forms over your state forms because of a couple of different reasons, which I'll get to on a later slide as well. Lending updates. Let's talk about lending. So one of the things that it's important for you to know is the VA. So the VA, as you might recall, had a rule that if you are a VA borrower, you are not allowed to pay any commissions towards your buyer agent commissions, right? You can charge them as a buyer, as an agent, you can charge them a transaction fee, you can charge them any fees. Well, there's now a temporary waiver on that prohibition. So the VA has agreed that VA borrowers deserve a voice and a choice in their buyer agency agreements. And so they have created a temporary waiver that goes into effect or went into effect August 10th. So it's now applicable. And it is allowed in two circumstances. So if your MLS is an NAR affiliated MLS and participant and opt-in into the settlement, the waiver does apply to you. The second scenario where it might apply if your MLS is opted out for some reason, that if the commissions cannot flow from the listing broker to the buyer broker. So I'm actually going to try to share in the chat some language that was shared that I found online. Hopefully that comes through for you. Copy that and paste it in the email to yourself so you have that language. But that's going to be important for you to have. The second thing is FHA, VA, Fannie, Freddie, those guys all have stated that so long as it remains customary, a credit or concession by a seller to a borrower for commissions will not count against limits on gifts and third-party contributions. This is really important for two reasons. Number one, as long as it remains customary, right? So as long as sellers continue to do this, they will continue this carve out. But this is important because if you're going to leverage concessions as a part of a way that whether the seller offers it as a concession proactively to the buyer, or the buyer requests concessions from a seller, the amount that you request, a portion of that may be going to buyer agent compensation, and a portion of that might be going towards the buyer's actual closing costs, prepaids, et cetera. In that scenario, we have lenders. I need you to talk to your lenders, guys, because some lenders are not on the same page with us about this or their own rules. And so it's important that you share the rules with them so that they don't make this mistake. But as you're writing this up, it would behoove you, I believe, and you want to talk to your lender about how you do this. But if you're going to leverage as concessions in the purchase contract that you're writing this up as, you will probably want to write it up something along the lines of, seller agrees to credit buyer X, total X concession towards the buyer's closing costs, prepaids, buyer agent compensation, et cetera, as defined as follows. And then like maybe one, buyer agent compensation credits in the amount of Y, whatever that is, and then the balance Z towards the remaining balance of buyer's closing cost credits, prepaids, et cetera, right? So Y plus Z equals X. I hope you guys get the math there, or A plus B equals C. So you would want to break that up. And why do we want to do that? Because the portion that is being used for buyer agent commission, we don't want that to count towards their total concession credits that they're allowed under the rules. So this is really important for you to work very specifically with your lenders before you even write offers. A lot of agents don't talk to the lender just other than to get pre-approval, and then they dig deep after. You need to go deep with your lenders beforehand, because buyer affordability is now not just a matter of purchase price, but it's also a matter of closing costs and the cost of acquisition. So remember, the buyer agent commission just moved from the seller side of the settlement statement to the buyer side of the settlement statement. And depending on how you write this up will determine whether it moves back to the seller side because the seller is going to pay the brokers directly, or if they're just going to give a credit to the buyer and the buyer's going to maintain their costs, including their buyer agent compensation. This is not that difficult. And I will have an image for you just to kind of visualize it. But it is important for you to conceptually understand and talk with your lender so that way you can make sure you're writing this up properly so that it passes through underwriting. So this is really, really, really important that you get this particular issue and concept. The next piece here is the NAR has empowered our MLSs to enforce these agreements. So this is a big deal here too. Some of the consequences of not following through with these rule changes are, number one, you could be asked to return your commissions, meaning you don't get paid. And we don't want that to happen, right? So not following these rules can result in you not getting paid, having to return a commission. It could also result in significant fines. I've seen fines as low as $500 to start, but I've seen them as high as $15,000. All right. So that's a massive amount of money. Not only do you not want to not get paid, but then also to have to write a check, of a significant fine. It's just not worth it to me. And number three, you can get suspended or removed from the MLS, which, as we all know, the MLS is currently our most valuable tool and the tool belt. Most of us cannot do our business in real estate without access to the MLS, at least not well. So, we certainly don't want to see that happen to you as well. So as a part of their enforcement, MLSs may ask you for a copy of your agreement and for you to be able to prove that you have one and the date that it was executed versus the date of showing. And number two, they may also expect us to inform on one another. And I will tell you, I expect that agents will in fact inform on one another, because to not have someone not play by the rules, it doesn't just harm agents, it harms consumers. Because we also have to transition. Not only do we have to transition in this change, but consumers have to transition as well. So this is a new rule that impacts them. And if we have some agents playing outside the lines, it impacts the entire ecosystem, right? And it can cause it all to malfunction, I'll say. So it's really important. The same way that you don't accidentally put a listing in the MLS without a listing agreement, please do not accidentally write a purchase and sale agreement and an offer without getting your buyer agent agreement executed with that customer. All right. The next piece here is open houses. A lot of people had concerns that they would have to get a buyer agent agreement for every unrepresented buyer that walks through the open house. And NAR has since clarified that that's not necessarily the case, that as long as that you're not working with that buyer specifically, you don't have to have an agreement with them just to let them walk through an open house. But as soon as you discover that they are looking to hire someone, you should, in fact, get an agreement executed with them. Now, I would recommend if you're running lots of open houses, I anticipate open houses will revive as a result of this because it is like a free look for a buyer. And so you might see an uptick in unrepresented buyers coming to open houses. But you will want to find a way to notify them, educate them on these changes, and then do real follow-up with them so that you can eventually convert them into customers that have hired you to go to work for them. So also sign calls. You do not need an agreement to answer sign call questions. And you do not need an agreement just because someone's on your website browsing, hearting, and favoriting properties. However, if it becomes, you find out from their timeline, they need to work with someone and they're ready to work with someone, they start putting you to work to start browsing, finding properties for them, to schedule showings, you would want to get an agreement in place with them in that scenario. So I'm not going to talk on this screen. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to take a screenshot. This is a script, a basic script that you can use if you need to update your process from going from phone call to appointment, like consultation versus phone call to showing. So if you need language to convert them, this is a sample script for you. I'm actually not going to talk about this page either because we're running out of time. But this page, go ahead and scan the QR code here. This will take you to an email that just hit send. Do not modify it. Do not change it. Do not add anything to this email. Just use the QR code, hit send. It will email you back a copy of an article I wrote for Inman on how to articulate and build a personalized value proposition for you and your business. This is, of course, I wrote it with buyer agents in mind, but I think it will also be relevant to listing agents as well. Also, I would say that it really kind of helps you think about and formulate what your unique value proposition is beyond the list that Realtor.com has done or beyond the list that NAR has given us. And it was written out of my frustration for people telling agents, oh, just articulate your value or just treat a buyer like you would a listing. I feel like it's not the same. And that to sit into a listing appointment versus a buyer consultation, they're not the same. And so being prepared for one versus the other, I think is really, really important and valuable. And so the value proposition is unique as well. So hopefully that helps you. So let's talk about best practices when talking to sellers. So I want to spend a little time here. In the past, there was really traditionally only one way for a buyer agent to get paid, and that was that unilateral offer of compensation in the MLS from the listing broker to the buyer broker. And now that the rules have changed and that's no longer applicable, and that apparatus and that mechanism and all the structure that protected that and moved that path forward is all gone now with one simple rule change. Okay. So because of that, there's now multiple ways for a buyer agent to get paid. And so some of those ways are a buyer can agree to pay their agent and pay for it directly out of their own funds. A seller can pay the buyer broker directly through an agreement. All of this, by the way, gets paid through escrow. No one's actually writing a check to EXP or vice versa. It would be as a part of submitting to title and closing and escrow, and then the funds would get distributed. And I only say that because I always have at least one or two people in the background like, oh, do they pay us direct? When I say that, it just means that it moves from the buyer's side of the settlement statement to the seller's side of the settlement statement, okay? So the buyer can pay their buyer agent, which it lives on the buyer side of the settlement statement. The seller can pay the buyer's agent and it lives on the seller side of the settlement statement. Or the seller can give a credit or a concession to the buyer and it stays on the buyer side of the settlement statement, and there's credits from the seller to help offset or pay that amount. So those are the three main ways. And the fourth way I would add is that it could be a combination of more than one of these, meaning the seller could pay a portion and the buyer could pay a portion. And the reason I bring this up is because, as I mentioned earlier, your fee is capped. You can accept less. You just cannot accept more, but that also doesn't mean you're not entitled to the full fee that you charge at the end of the day. So I want to encourage you to mind your language in these conversations you're having with buyers. I would remove this automatic give of, I know I put my X here as my fee, but I'll take whatever the seller's giving me. What if the seller's not giving enough, number one? And number two, what if that buyer can actually afford to pay you and you've already given up a good chunk of your commission and your compensation for, all of the work that you do. So, prepare a buyer that, you'll get as much as you can from the seller, if not all of it and or more. But in the event that the buyer chooses to only even, for example, ask for less, if the buyer can afford to pay the difference, that gives us more negotiation room with the seller on other things, right? So do not necessarily give up all of your fee just because you think that's what the buyer wants to hear. You'd be surprised. I think many of them very much respect what we do and need our help and are willing to make sure we are paid fairly for the services that we provide. So, but with that being said, the fifth way that an agent technically can be paid as a result of the NAR settlement is the continuation of broker-to-broker payment. Now, this is also known as commission sharing, meaning the seller pays the listing broker enough money for them to collect the fee as well as to pay a buyer's agent. And so this was carved out as still allowable under the NAR settlement. However, the DOJ has made it pretty clear that they believe this practice is part of the problem. And it's a continuation of the old way that we did things that led to where we are today. And so you have seen EXP come out with a broker policy on this, as well as many other brokers are following suit. Some have done it publicly, some have done it privately, but I'm telling you, lots of brokers are in agreement with EXP on this. And this having a broker policy that prohibits or is against commission sharing. And why is that, you might be asking? Why did we do that? It's for the very reason I just described, which is the entire apparatus, the entire process of all that is now broken. So remember, it was the putting the commission into the MLS that made it binding between brokers. That's now gone. It's not required in, and so it's not required out. So it's really no longer a need for the middleman, which was the listing broker, is no longer needed. So instead of the funds passing from seller to listing broker to buyer agent, why not cut out the middleman and just have the seller agree to pay that amount to the buyer's agent? Not only this, for you as listing brokers, this is going to be a competitive advantage. While that other independent small indie brokerage who's decided to continue commission sharing as a part of their model, go into a listing and ask for, X percentage, you get to go in and ask for A and instruct that seller on the following, which is, listen close to what I'm going to say here. And someone should mark the time because this is the piece you'll probably come back to and listen to again. And that is, when should we talk to a seller about paying commissions and why might a seller pay a commission? So number one, at a minimum, you should be talking to sellers about buyer agent commission at the listing appointment. If nothing else, it's to prepare the seller to expect to receive offers with varying commission requests in those purchase offers, right? So let me give you an example. One buyer might instruct their agent to write an offer where they're not asking for any concessions or compensation at all. Another buyer may instruct their agent to write an offer where they're only asking for half of the compensation to be paid because the buyer can afford the other half. And maybe it's because they want other terms, right, that are favorable or more important to the buyer and or the seller for that matter. And number three, you might have a buyer who instructs their agent to ask for, all of their compensation to be paid, and they can cover their own closing costs. And then a fourth scenario is a buyer could submit and ask their agent to submit an offer that not only asks for that agent's compensation to be paid, but an additional amount for their own closing costs and concession, asking for additional concessions so that they can, have that additional funds, maybe to offset repairs, buy down the rate, or pay for their closing costs, right? So you as the listing agent, do you know before a buyer submits an offer what they're going to need? Absolutely not. You don't have that crystal ball. So why not prepare the seller for that? Say, seller, I'm going to charge X for my fees. What we charge the buyer's agent is going to be completely dependent upon the buyer, right? Each buyer is going to come to us with the various requests and needs that they have. And unfortunately, I don't know what those are going to be. I can tell you it ranges from X to Z, and I'll write up a net sheet for you that shows the highest and the lowest that it could be, from 0 to X. But I want to prepare you that it could be anywhere in between that. And so, but I want you to know that you get to make a decision with a complete picture. Meaning, when you decide if you want to pay a buyer agent commission or any other concessions, we're going to know a lot of other details as well. We're going to know the purchase price. We're going to know the deadlines. We're going to know all the contingencies, if any. We're going to know if they are flexible on, A, B, and C, whatever that is. We're going to know if there's an appraisal request. We're going to know all of that. So when you make that decision about what to pay the buyer agent commission, you can evaluate it against the integrity of the entire offer. And then not only that, when you receive it, we get to decide together, or you get to decide, and I'll do this on your behalf, I should say, what your counter should be, if any. If those terms are acceptable, we can accept them. If you would like to counter, I can help coach you and advise you through your countering of their offer. Do you see how much more powerful that gets for the buyer and the seller to have some agency and their relationship to the transaction? They get to own it, right? We get to give them that power back. This is a good thing, right? And so for you as agents that are concerned about getting paid and afraid that sellers aren't going to pay you, let me remind you of a couple of things. It's a mindset shift. Number one, up until recently, 100% of sellers paid buyer agent commission. You know why? Because they had to. It was part of a requirement to get into the MLS. I don't suspect that's going to change overnight 100% the other way. Are we going to have sellers that don't want to pay? Sure, we already have that. We have sellers that do that today. Do you have buyers that need help from sellers? Absolutely, we do. And sellers often, in those price points especially, they understand that that's part of the transaction. They have to pay, right? In order to sell their home, there's a good chance they will need to do that. So but there's also going to be some buyers out there who can afford to pay you. So, and will respect what you do. But you have to earn that respect, and you have to respect yourself too, right? So I just want to encourage you to change your mindset about that. The other thing here is sellers may decide also to proactively offer concessions. But again, I just want to remind you, do not treat concessions like commission. If you are going to offer concessions, make sure that you prepare a seller that number can change. And so I always say I prefer not to anchor a seller to a number because of what I just said previously, which is you don't know what the buyer is going to want or need. So let's wait until we get the full terms so we can do our own math and assessment to see what's in the best interest of the customer we're working with. If you were that listing agent that used to tell a seller, if no buyer's agents are going to show your property unless you offer X percentage, those days are over. And so please don't say that anymore. And not only that, you want to avoid steering and things of that nature, both on the listing side and on the buy side. And so please don't say that. Instead, when you're talking to sellers about buyer agent compensation, think of it in these next 3 ways. Number one, it's an incentive to the buyer. It's a marketing incentive to the buyer, not the buyer's agent. Okay. Helping the buyer with their closing costs that just went up as a part of purchasing is an important and valuable incentive to that buyer and a part of that negotiation. So that's one thing. Number two, commission's now a negotiation tool where it wasn't before, at least not in the same way. Will negotiate commissions the same way you negotiate purchase price, contingencies, deadlines, etc. And it might be one of those things where the buyer needs just a little bit of help, but because they prefer not to borrow more money in the purchase price, so they rather their purchase price be lower and give up more cash on the front end to save interest rate, like all the interest that they would pay on that borrowed money, right? Like these are the kinds of advice and I can't talk conversations you need to be having with your customer and their lender to help put together the right formula for that borrower to have success. You also need to talk to sellers about buyer affordability. In the past, it was tied to list price. Buyer affordability was tied to list price. Well, now it's also tied to the acquisition cost, right? The cost of sale. And so because this fee now has moved over to this side of the table, how much a buyer can afford is also tied to how much they have in free funds or funds towards down payment, closing costs, and prepaids, right? So as that number has now grown, that means their purchase power has gone down, right? In relationship to interest rates. Interest rates also affect affordability, right? So now these are all considerations that a seller needs to take into mind when deciding what's going to place, what are all the tools and tool belt that seller has to put their home in the best position forward to get sold for the amount of money and then the timeline that the seller has. And the thing to remember for all of it, it comes down to the bottom line, guys. So net sheets, whether on the buy side or the sell side, net sheets are going to be discussed with should be discussed with every offer. There's a world where a buyer can make an offer that's below list price, but ask for no concessions versus an offer that's made above list price, but ask for concessions. There's a world where that first offer could be better net to the seller than the former or than the latter, right? So those are all new things that you're going to have to work through. The best place to get good net sheet materials is if you don't build one on your own in Excel, you can run it through your title company and something along those lines. Those are great places to get net sheets. And then listing agents, in order to do your job, you do not need a copy of the buyer's broker agreement. Okay? You don't need a copy of it. It's not required. You don't need that on your file. No one's asking you as a listing agent for a copy of your listing agreement. You do not need a copy of the buyer agreement. And buyer's agents, you do not need to give a copy of the buyer agreement to the listing broker. You don't need to attach it to your offer. I believe there might be one state where that I'm aware of that it might be required, but unless you're in that state where it's specifically required, you don't need to do that. Just make sure it's in your SkySoap file. So where to focus going forward? Focus on the facts and not your fears. What I like to remind people is fears often result of a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience. And when it comes to experience, we're all in the same boat and we're all going to be experiencing this together. And with time, you will feel better about all of this. But what you can do today to mitigate your fear is to get more knowledgeable. So doing trainings like this, don't just watch it once, watch it again. I have multiple versions of this same talk online and in various places. Go listen to it more than once and go listen to it in from various resources, right? So that you can, because I promise you everything that I've said, you probably retain 25% of it, right? So you need to hear it more often so you can get some of those other nuanced concepts, right? It sounds simple when I say it, but when you go back to practice it, you will forget. I just know it. It's human nature. It's natural. So dig in onto building your knowledge. Number two, focus on improving your negotiation skills. That is going to be your number one tool set or skill set going forward to move you from surviving to thriving. Invest time, money, and energy into negotiation skills, whether it's investing in the designations, reading books or listening to podcasts. Chris Voss, who wrote the book Never Split the Difference, has YouTube interviews where he specifically applies this skill set he's teaching to real estate and for realtors. Go spend time watching those videos, study, practice, learn, spar with the material, practice it, implement it, and reevaluate how you're doing with it. But go invest in those negotiation skills big time. And then focus on what the buyers want and what their fears are. This is another page to do a screenshot because they're scripting and I won't read. But the buyer comes to you with a goal or vision of the home that they want. So they want to make sure they have access. And you have access to a whole inventory of homes on Zenlist through EXP exclusives that they can only get access to through you. As being the largest brokerage in the country, we've sold the most transactions, right? We have the largest transaction count by numbers in the country. And so we have the ability to have the largest off-market database than anyone else in the country, right? And so they will want to see and know that you have access to listings perhaps before they hit MLS or while they're still off market where there's less competition. They have access to that through you. Are you utilizing that tool? If you're not utilizing Zenlist, you need to go get signed up for Zenlist, both as a listing agent and making sure your listings get in there, as well as a buyer's agent, so that you can give access to that tool. To your customers. That is a unique value proposition that you have as a person who is an agent with EXP. Now, they also expect you to have a plan and a process that you understand and you can articulate to them because they have fear of joining in. And they, like I said earlier, that fear of missing out on the right home for themselves. They also have fear of other people's opinions because they want to make sure you're going to get them the best deal possible. They don't want to hear from the media or Uncle Joe or grandma or grandpa or their children or parents or whatever, or partner that they could have done a better job with someone else, right? So these are the things, these are some scripts that you can use. This comes from a book, Never Split the Difference by Phil Jones and Chris Smith and one other gentleman. I need to learn his name. But that is a really good book and it's exactly what to say for real estate agents by Phil Jones. So going over what tools you have access to as an EXP agent. Again, I'm Express Offers. If you're a listing agent, it is a proven strategy to leverage cash offers to get listing appointments. Let me repeat that for you people in the back. It is a proven marketing strategy to leverage cash offers to get listing appointments. Use Express Offers. You should be leveraging Express Offers to get more listing appointments so that you can be in control of the transaction and your compensation, okay? So Cash Offers is a valuable tool that we offer you at EXP Express Offers. Not only do we have a great relationship with Open Door, but we also have 40 other active buyers in our platform and growing. So get certified, leverage these tools so that you can do more transactions, okay? And you can, at a minimum, get more opportunities and more at-bats at a listing. Number two, leverage EXP exclusives for the same reasons I said earlier. And number three, make sure you're leveraging our EXP documents and state training. These documents we have prepared for you and you know, have such great value to you as a tool in the tool belt if you'll just utilize them, right? So the first one is the seller direct pay form. This is also known as confirmation of compensation from the seller. This is in SkySlope. This is where you can move the buyer agent commission from the buyer side of the settlement statement to the seller side of the settlement statement, okay? So if you need to do that in your transaction, it's through that form that you would do that. So you'd have the seller sign that form. You can get that seller to sign that form even before you show the property if the seller's willing to do it. And then that's one less thing you and that buyer have to worry about as you're touring that home and you know, writing any offers for it. You can also submit it with your offers as well, right? Number two, we have a non-exclusive buyer broker agreement. This agreement has been praised by Consumer Federation of America and others for being a consumer-friendly document. And so why is this document the way it is? It's a result of your feedback as agents and leaders in the communities you serve. You told us you wanted a document that was easy to explain, easy to understand, and easy to get a buyer to sign. And that's what we've given you with the BBA 2.0. We also have the single property buyer rep agreement. I've given you a use case for that already, which is, you know, you can use it as a supplement to your BBA, but you can also leverage it for those consumers that call you that are just like, I just want to see 123 Main Street, and that's it. You know, if that's the case, then you can use this document to get in front of them. We know two things about buyers. Number one, they typically do not buy the first home they see. And number two, they typically do hire, and I think it's upwards of 83%, the first agent they meet. So leverage that document so that you can, get an opportunity to actually sit down with them and do an actual traditional agreement. For our listing agents, we have the disclosure and acknowledgement of non-representation. My only statement on this is if you're a listing agent, do not work for buyers for free. Make sure there's a fee charged somewhere. We will completely corrode and dismantle our entire industry if listing agents start working for free. It won't be good for listing agents. It won't be good for buyers agents. It won't be good for the consumer. So that would be my advice. Please do not work for free. Number two, I don't have an opinion on what you charge. Just do not work for free. Number two, amendment to the real estate listing agreement. We talked about that modification form. We have one. This will remove not only the language about compensation off the MLS, but it will also modify your listing agreement so that you are no longer collecting both sides of the commission, and that we can now freely negotiate that with the buyer's agent and the buyer as they write their offers. And then number six, the sixth one here is the exclusive listing agreement 2.0. This is our new agreement that's in compliance with our new policies regarding commission sharing, regarding concessions, regarding communication on fees, and including the required language in the MLS that requires us to say that all fees are negotiable. So those are those documents. So take advantage of those documents and the state trainings. At EXP, every state is going all in over the last couple of weeks and including this week, trying to prepare us for these changes and get us educated. So please, our brokers spend so much time learning, preparing to educate you. Please take advantage of those trainings. And so with that, thank you. This last QR code, I know we went over a couple of minutes. I know we started a couple of minutes late, so I apologize for that. My fault. But here, this QR code is going to take you to the NAR FAQs. That webpage, heart it, favorite it, save it. There's tons of valuable information in there, including NAR's answers on a lot of the questions that we've even talked about today. You can also connect with me at kendallbonner.com, or on Instagram is another great place to message and connect to me. Also on Workplace if you need me. But the thing I want to remind you is this: NAR and the MLSs, they can only take us here, okay? The finish line for all of this is here. This is the finish line. And the gap in the middle are our brokers and our leaders, right? They are they are deciding the gap in the middle, because the MLSs and NARs can't tell brokers and agents how to run their business, because the gap in the middle is antitrust. So what you're seeing, wherever you feel like, well, that's a conflict from what I heard the settlement agreement said. I'll give you an example: commission sharing. It's allowed in the NAR settlement, but brokers are building policy against it. That is the brokers leading in the middle to get us to the finish line. So that is what I want to just kind of make sure and plant that last seed of education for you, is that if you're working with someone, or you know another agent who's like, I don't know with anything on the gap in the middle, send them to places like EXP YouTube channel and this particular video and others, because I've talked about what that gap in the middle looks like. And so, and that is a place where I think a lot of brokers are struggling. Thankfully, we have great leadership, and Leo Pareja and Holly Mayberry and others who are also behind the scenes, all working to build an experience and a policy and a brokerage model that works for you and is designed for your success and the success of your customers. So thank you, Black EXP Network and all the Ben family and community, for letting me be on today. I appreciate you guys so, so, so much.
Wow. Thank you so much for being here. So much valuable information, but as you said, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of changes, and this is just the precursor, right? So once we get into it, we're going to see different things happening. There's going to be constant changes, updates. So make sure you're tapped into, as Kendall said, all of your EXP networks, whether locally, on your state level, market level. Make sure you're in contact with your brokers if you have questions. This is going to be something that's going to take us some time to, one, fully implement and get settled on. But one thing is for sure, it's happening. It's not going to not happen. So get ready. Thank you so much. We didn't have a ton of time. We didn't have any time for questions, but there are a ton of questions here. Kendall, is there a way that we can get some of the questions that were in the chat answered and maybe even emailed out, or what do you think is the best way we can handle
Well, I mean, if everyone has time to sit on here for another 10, 15 minutes, I have time. So if
Okay.
you have, that's up to you guys.
Well, we are here. I recognize that some may have to jump off, but again, this is being recorded. So we can get this out to you for anybody who has joined us. We'll get it out to you, or you can catch the replay if you want to get those questions answered. Any future questions that are had, is it best to just direct it back to your state brokers?
For the most part, yes. Go back to your state brokers, because they can be even more specific than I can for their state. And most of them know me and, in the leadership. So they have resources that if they don't have an answer, they know where to get it. So Definitely, generally speaking, it's a great practice to go to state brokers. They're so helpful. We have amazing state brokers.
Perfect. Yes, we do. So we're going to kick it off with questions. The first one is from Timberly Abel. We are no longer responsible for negotiating commissions for both sides. What is the best way to go about advising your seller to offer buyer agent commission?
So I did actually address this one specifically in the talk, and I'll refer everyone back to that slide, which was the one where I said, how do we talk to sellers about commissions? But like I said, it's one, reminding them it's a marketing incentive to the buyer. It's a negotiation tool now. Talk to them about buyer affordability. Prepare them that they're going to receive offers with varying requests. Some, like I said, are going to request $0 in concessions. Some might request as high as 6 or 10% in concessions. I don't know. It depends on the purchase price. It depends on so many things. We don't know what that's going to look like, but you want to prepare your seller to receive that, and remind the seller that as they receive these offers, the beautiful thing is now I'm not asking you to make a decision in a vacuum or without all the details. Now I'm asking you to make a decision with all the details, right? What the offer is, what their contingencies are, what the escrow is, what the deadlines are. And we get to negotiate all of it.
Great. This next question was more getting clarity because I hear this in all the different chat groups for agents that are concerned about having a buyer sign something up front when they have no established relationship and having to commit to some kind of cost up front. So essentially, for those who don't prefer an exclusive buyer agreement up front, they can still be settlement compliant by getting a non-exclusive type of showing agency or one-time limited. So if it's for this particular property, understand that this compensation, you can kind of address those things in those agreements up front.
Yeah, so there's really like 3 options, right? There's a single property buyer agent agreement. So it's just for that one property, right? And you can see for 123 Main Street, this is my fee. And so some customers may want to have some non-committed or what might be non-committal, and you want to lower friction. So you say, hey, listen, you don't know me. I'll just show you this one property. I do have to get this agreement signed by you to show it, because I have to disclose my fees to you and what I would charge if you actually end up buying this property and working with me. And so, please sign this one agreement. And then there's that agreement. There's also what we have is an exclusive, we have a non-exclusive. Let me say it again. We have a non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. That's our BBA 2.0. It is non-exclusive, but that would work really great for those customers who, again, it lowers the friction and the barrier. And it says, hey, anything I show you, you're committing to work with me to purchase it. And this is what I get paid to do that. If you go see something with someone else and you decide you don't want to work with me, all I ask is you let me know. You send me an email letting me know you want to cancel, and we'll both move on from there, right? Like however that conversation works, right? So you have that option. And then your third option is a lot of states have created, because we as a company do not have an exclusive agreement at this time, buyer agreement. You can do an exclusive agreement that's state compliant. Now, remember, exclusivity and agency are two separate things. I talked about that at the top of the conversation. Agency has to do with your fiduciary duties. Exclusivity and non-exclusivity just has to do with the working relationship with the customer, meaning if you get paid on everything that they do or just on the things you are working on them with, right? So you technically could have an agency relationship or fiduciary duties with a non-exclusive buyer. I hope that makes sense for you. Those two things are separate. So, but you might see
and understand. I was just saying that's important to understand because I think that's just a concept that we're not necessarily used to.
Correct. This whole concept of non-exclusivity is new, but it's as a result of trying to be, I mean, it's not new and just generally, because I remember I described it, we already have a commission agreement. That's been a non-exclusive agreement that we've had access to forever. It's just new in the buyer world because most buyer agent agreements were exclusive. And they also were tied to fiduciaries a lot of times, but now that's opened up because we want to be able to give our consumers choice and have more options to negotiate with them, right?
Right. So you can be a fiduciary and non-exclusive. And I think that kind of answered Denise's question, or saying we want to see two separate forms so it's very clear to the buyer. And Vanna asked about Texas. I would probably refer that back to, does Texas allow a menu of services? That's definitely going to be a state broker question.
Absolutely.
Angela Pinnell asked, what do we do when we can't get into contact with the listing agent prior to showing and want to know if the seller is offering any compensation?
I honestly, I would say show it anyway. And, it doesn't matter. Let me give you guys another mindset shift. It doesn't matter if the seller says they're offering comp or not. Let me tell you why. It's because number one, if you've ever been a listing broker, and I'd love to see in the chat, like if this has happened to you, where a seller, and I'm going to use a roof as an example. A seller says to you as a listing agent, I'm not repairing the roof. I'm selling the house as is. I'm not repairing the roof. And what happens? A buyer along the lines will come in, make an offer, ask for the seller to repair the roof. And what does the seller do? They repair the roof, right? And part of it is because you're asking the seller to make a decision in a vacuum. When you ask that seller on the front end, I need you to repair the roof, all the seller can think about is, well, I don't know how much money I'm going to get. Am I going to get that money back? What's it going to cost me? That's all they can think about. So you're asking them, when you're asking them a question like that, it's a yes, no question, versus if you give it to them with an offer and say, hey, but they're willing to pay this, your net's going to be better because you fixed the roof, blah, 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 blah. They're willing to pay a little bit more. Now that seller can make an informed decision that takes into consideration all the moving parts that are important to them. Because another moving part might be timeline. It might be, other various expectations or needs that they have, right? Maybe sometimes they just want to know that buyer's skin in the game, that if they make this repair and it falls apart, they're going to get some of that money back, right? So you don't know what that seller needs. And so even if you did call me, Angela, and ask me as a listing agent, is the seller willing to pay compensation? My answer would be to you, put in the offer. Like, write it up. Tell us what your buyer needs. Tell us what your buyer wants. And I'm happy to talk to the seller about it. I mean, remember the listing agent, buyer agents, we're still cooperating. It just looks different. We both want this transaction to close. Listing agents I used to not think this way because I was primarily a listing agent, but I've since changed my mind. Buyer's agents are the real MVP, right? They're the ones that are helping direct these typically emotional buyers, bringing them to the table and getting them to meet the seller where the seller's needs are at. Because right now it's been a seller's market. So buyer's agents have had to work really hard to get these buyers to move in the direction to meet the sellers where the sellers are getting what they want and the buyers getting what they want. And so listing agents, be good to your buyer's agents. You need them. The chances of you selling all your own property is not very likely, even in this new world. There are going to be buyers who want to have their own representation. And to be honest, working both sides of the deal often sucks. not that great of an experience. So like the more often you can have another counterpart on the other side, typically, and you have a good counterpart on the other side, on both sides, that's success. That's success for the consumer. That's success for the agent. And so I highly recommend that you just write it up in your offer, because you never know what the buyer or what the seller is going to ultimately agree to.
Okay. Very good information. And I also just want to add that, sometimes we go into this thinking that if we're representing buyers, our main goal is to get a good deal on a property, when ultimately the goal is to get your client the house that they want. So sometimes that means like explaining to them what that means from the seller, like how do we get that seller to move in that direction? And so that's going to change based on the market and, everything related. So, okay, next question. I'm trying to focus on some of the questions that are specific questions. Some of the comments that we have starred, you can go back and review and revisit, because it's saying, can you repeat that statement? We have Elgin Walker. In sending offers over to a listing agent, do we need to supply the buyer broker agreement with commission and same on seller's side? So you did address this in your comment.
Yes, I'm telling you guys, like I knew you guys were going to have questions. That's why the only reason I ignored them is because I'm probably going to answer it through the talk. So yes, I specifically answered this one. You do not need to provide your agreements with your offers. Okay. And you should not be asking for them either.
Gotcha. Vanetta Anderson, do these rules apply to rental listings as well?
So technically the settlement applies to residential purchase and sale agreements. So not commercial, technically not rental. However, I'm going to tell you this. You're probably not going to see a carve out based on status in the MLS where compensation is allowed to be put in there for commercial and or rental. The commission bills is probably going away on all listing statuses, right? So I would say that, number one. Number two, as far as having an agreement in place, I think this is a needed change. I know in my marketplace, there was a lot of rules around working with renters that made it so that a lot of renters didn't get serviced by real estate professionals. And I think these new rules are going to open that up quite a bit. So while technically the rules don't apply, I would say transactionally or practically, you'll probably apply the same process, skill sets, and process with renters as you do with, your traditional buyers. But there's a huge market to work with renters. And so for those of you that have not been working for renters in the past, I highly recommend that you consider taking those calls, because sometimes buyers are buried in the renter pool. They just don't know it. And number two, there's other products. Like I have a renter advantage program I teach, and I coach my agents on, that puts renters in homes purchased by investors and they rent it back to that renter. And they can eventually purchase that home from them or just stay a renter. Like there's a lot of work that can be done with renters that I think this whole new way of looking at things and managing this these concepts would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Makeba Evans, I've heard mention of the 2-click rule in relation to IDX sites. Could you explain what that means?
Me too. And I'd like a better understanding as well. So that's a new rule to me. And that's on my list to talk to Holly about. But basically, this 2-click rule is an EXP rule. That means that you have to click 2 times. So let's say you put your compensation, or you allow your compensation as the seller's offering out to buyer agents on some third-party site. Sometimes those sites offer a click back. You have to click at least 2 times before it gets to your MLS fed IDX site. So that's my best explanation of it as I understand it. So that's going to be our policy. So we're not prohibiting you from putting a listing compensation out there if the seller directs you that, hey, I want you to market my listing offering ABC comp to a buyer's agent. It just needs to come direct from the seller. So it doesn't mean you can't market it and offer it. If the seller directs and wants you to do that, you can do that. You just can't put it on the MLS. And if you're going to put it online, you just want to make sure it doesn't link back to the MLS, like meaning, hey, if I click here, then it takes me directly back to an IDX site. Does that make sense?
I think I understand, but I'm sure everyone will have a lot more questions what that actually looks like in like practice.
Yeah, I'll just say this: stick to what's allowed for now. If you're going to market this, if you're directed by your seller, you can put, because that's another big question: where can I market compensation if I can't put an MLS? You can put on a yard sign, you can do a flyer, you can do an email, you can do a text. Assuming text and email, you're not violating spam laws, right? Sorry, I do want to put that warning out there. Like, don't violate this spam can or whatever those rules are. I should know what those laws are called, but you know what I mean. And then you can also put it on your own. You can put on your own listings. If a seller allows you to or wants you to promote a comp, you can put on your own IDX site for your own listings. So what does that mean? I can't put, if there's a Remax down the street and I know they're offering comp, I can't put that on my listing or on my listing website, right? So like I have a Sierra website is my provider. And, if you go on there, but you can look up my listings or you can look up the listings of other brokerages and agents, right? So I can have the comp on any of my listings. I just can't have it on anyone else's. Mm-hmm. So that is, and those are all IDX fed websites, right? Because we get that information directly from our own MLSs onto our websites to display. Mm-hmm. So for anyone that's just like, what does IDX mean? It's a data exchange.
Exchange. We're going to have a 2.0 class for that. Timberly Bell. So were you saying to not get the buyer's broker compensation from the seller sign at the listing agreement, but rather wait till offers come through to see how seller wants to move forward with compensation? I think it's really good to get clarity there.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm a reader as opposed to a listener. Let me just.
Sure.
Yes, that is correct. That you should be talking to sellers about buyer agent compensation at the listing appointment. I just would avoid anchoring them to a number, right? Because you don't know what the buyer's going to ask for. The buyer could ask for nothing. The buyer could ask for something. They could ask for everything and more, right? You don't know until those offers come in. And so I just feel like one, it gives you a competitive advantage with the seller because you're coming in with a real number, like in terms of like what your fee is, and that is committed. The seller is going to need to commit to that number, but any number beyond that, they get to negotiate, right? So that is the difference. To come in and have them pick a number is what I'm calling a commitment towards the great temptation, right? The great temptation is keeping everything as close to the same as it used to be going forward. And I want to try to help people avoid the great temptation. Don't be tempted to try to keep everything the same. We need to move forward. The sooner we all just mentally transition to this new practice way, or this new way of practice, this new way of doing business, not only is it easier on agents, but it'll be easier on the consumers. And that's who we really need to care about, because we all think this is a big shift for us. This is going to be a massive shift for buyers and sellers as well. And it doesn't mean that a lot is changing for them potentially, right? There's still going to be some sellers that are going to pay. There's going to be most sellers, I suspect, will still continue to pay buyer agent compensation. But how we get to a number that they pay, that whole process is changing. So, and I think this is good, because a lot of buyer agents used to complain that the offering of compensation that the listing agent negotiated wasn't good enough or high enough, or wasn't the fee they expected to receive. Well, now buyer's agents, you have all the power back. You get to negotiate what your fee is, and you get to charge it. And then not only that, stand behind it and negotiate it to make sure it gets paid.
Absolutely. And you talked about this when you discussed on the listing side, if someone calls for compensate, like ask what's being paid or provided by the seller. You just ask them to put it into, like, what do they want, put it into the offer, and you can make that decision versus feeling like you're tied to it, because, everything's negotiable. It always has been. Has there been any feedback on buyers incorporating the agent fee into the borrowed amount for the mortgage?
Good question. So I will say that there are a couple of things. Number one, down payment assistance programs. You should research them in a new way now with this in mind, because some some down payment assistance programs will allow some of those dollars to go towards agent commissions. So that is good. You need to know that. So as opposed to borrowing it traditionally through a mortgage, go to down payment assistance first. Number one. Number two, there are some lenders like our own Success Lending, who is our EXP partner. And if you are an agent with EXP and you close transactions, guess what? You are also a shareholder at EXP, right? You are, hopefully investing dollars and getting shares back at EXP. Success Lending is one of our partners that helps drive the value of our shares up. So you should be investing in Success Lending as a part of, your business model, meaning use them. But they have a loan product that's 102% financing. That extra 2% is designed to help go towards not agent compensation, but at least buyers' closing costs, right? And so I'm not saying it can't be used for agent compensation, because it probably can, but it's just, that additional product. But I would say, generally speaking, the day we start to see it become customary for a buyer to borrow commissions to pay for their agent is probably the day that sellers stop paying it. So I feel kind of, it's not something that I really think we should promote as for buyers to be able to borrow it. As long as sellers keep paying it, we shouldn't need to have buyers borrow it. It'll be wrapped into the purchase price, right? The way it always has been, as a cost of the sale. It's not really about value of the property. It's just the cost of doing business, right? Is agent commissions on both sides. So I don't think we should be pushing towards that model until we get to a place where it becomes a problem and a necessity.
That's a good point. Vander Crosley, can verbal agreements stand up for commission agreements?
No. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Period.
That's the best, period. Let me see if there's any questions that we have missed. I think that is it. I'm a little bit new to this platform, but I think we covered everything. So just want to say a huge round of applause if you can give, if you're still here with us. I want to throw some claps in the chat, or again, if you have any future questions, because we are about 30 minutes over now. But I'm so grateful and thankful that you spent the time with us to answer these questions. There's going to be a ton more coming up. So definitely, find your group, find your community where you get your mentorship, your training. And again, EXP Workplace has been, just a wealth of information. Don't forget to go into the world where you can talk to your brokers. Every state broker, I am more than sure, has trainings on the regular for these things as well. So thank you again so much, Kendall, for joining us today. I do want to make 2 quick announcements, and maybe more, but there are, or were at least, some pinned links if you want to join us here at Black EXP Network, also known as BEN. We are inclusive. Anyone can join as long as you're an EXP agent. Go on to our workplace and just join our workplace group. And that makes you a member. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So just search Black EXP Network. Again, I don't know if Ashley, you're around here and can link or place those links again. I know it might not be clickable, but you can copy and paste. Other than that, we have another tribe training. So we do education, things very similar to this, once a month on the second Tuesday of the month. And our next one is tomorrow. So you're getting lots and lots of information with Stacy Pulliam, who is going to be talking about like look beyond the walls. So exploring opportunities of government contracts related to real estate industry. We have a specific skill set where we pull so many different parties together to be able to make something work. And so there's a lot of different government contracting opportunities, and she's going to tell us more about how to get involved in that in our local markets. There is I'm utilizing the people that are here and the supports behind. If you could drop a link for that. If not, again, find us on Workplace. There are links for that. And our Workplace to register for that. That's tomorrow, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern, and then, whatever that is for you in your time zone. Outside of that, we are looking for those to join us at Ben and our leadership. So if you are interested, find me, Rachel Allen, on Workplace, and just shoot me a quick message if you're interested. We'd love to get you involved in our education, our events, marketing, all the things that we do here, because we want to continue to grow together. So outside of that, I think that's everything. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. And thank you again, Kendall. Bye, everyone.
Bye.